I've spent 12 years as a night shift nurse. You'd think I'd be used to the night energy of a hospital. You get used to the sounds of the building settling, the hum of the oxygen machines, and even the occasional feeling that someone is standing behind you when you're charting at the nurse's station. But St. Jude's General was different. The hospital was built in the 1940s, and the basement level, level B4, was a place time forgot. Level B4 was used for overflow storage. It held broken gurneys, outdated monitors, and piles of yellowing patient files. It also sat directly beneath the old pediatric ICU. It was 3:15 a.m. A heavy thunderstorm was battering the city, and the hospital's backup generators were struggling. The lights were doing that slow, rhythmic pulse, bright, then dim, then bright again. My supervisor asked me to head down to B4 to find a specific vintage ventilator for a patient whose lungs were failing. The elevator ride down felt like it took 20 minutes. When the doors opened, the air hit me. It was 10 degrees colder and smelled of ozone and old paper. My flashlight beam cut through the thick, stagnant air. I was halfway down the main corridor, navigating past a wall of stacked wheelchairs, when I heard it. Giggle! It was high-pitched, soft, and unmistakably a child's laugh. I froze. There were no children allowed on B4. There were no people allowed on B4 at this hour. "Hello?" I called out. My voice sounded thin and fragile in the vast concrete space. I turned a corner into the old records room. That's when I saw her. A little girl, no older than 6, wearing a faded blue hospital gown. She was sitting on a stack of files, her back to me. She was swinging her legs back and forth, humming a tune that I didn't recognize. It was slow, mournful, and felt like it was vibrating in my teeth. "Honey," I said, stepping closer. "Are you lost? How did you get down here?" The girl didn't turn around. She stopped swinging her legs. The humming ceased. "I can't find my room," she whispered. Her voice didn't sound like it was coming from her mouth. It sounded like it was coming from the air all around me. The tall man in the basement said my room moved. A chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning raced down my spine. "What tall man, sweetie? Come with me. I'll take you back upstairs to the nurses." I reached out to put a hand on her shoulder. Just as my fingers were an inch away from the fabric of her gown, the power cut out completely. Total, absolute darkness. In that darkness, I felt a hand. It wasn't the small, soft hand of a child. It was a cold, bony, impossibly long hand that wrapped around my wrist with the strength of a vice. "He says you can stay in my room instead," the voice whispered. But this time, the voice was deep, a low, guttural growl that sounded like tearing metal. I screamed, pulling back with everything I had. I felt the skin on my wrist tear as I broke free. I didn't look back. I sprinted toward the elevator, my flashlight beam dancing wildly against the walls. As I reached the doors and hammered the up button, I looked back one last time. The hallway was empty, but on the floor, in the middle of the dust-covered concrete, was a single, fresh red balloon. It was bobbing gently in a draft that shouldn't have existed. When the elevator doors finally closed and I made it back to the ICU, I looked at my wrist. There was no bruise, there were no scratch marks, but there was something else. Pressed into my skin, as if branded there, were the numbers B402. I checked the old hospital records the next day. Room B402 was a room that existed in 1952. It was located exactly where the storage unit is now. It was closed down after a tall man in a doctor's coat was found performing unauthorized surgeries on children in the middle of the night. I don't go to the basement anymore, and sometimes when I'm on the 4th floor, I can hear the faint sound of a red balloon tapping at the bottom of the floorboards, waiting for someone else to come down and help her find her room.
The fluorescent lights of the stop and go don't hum, they scream. It's a high-pitched electric vibration that burrows into your skull after 6 hours of silence. My name is Elias, and I've worked the 11 p.m. to 7 a.m. shift at this gas station for 3 years. It's a lonely stretch of highway, miles from the nearest town. Most nights, my only customers are truckers who look like they haven't slept since the 90s. But tonight was different. Tonight the air felt heavy, like the atmosphere was pressing down on the glass windows, trying to get in. Around 3:15 a.m., the store was a tomb. I needed to restock the motor oil, which meant going down to the cold room, the basement. Our basement isn't like a normal cellar. It was built into the limestone of the mountain, damp and perpetually smelling of iron and old grease. The stairs are wooden, narrow, and they groan under even the slightest weight. I grabbed the heavy iron key and opened the door. The darkness below seemed to swallow the light from the store. As I stepped onto the third stair, I heard it. Thud, thud, thud. Heavy, wet footsteps. They weren't coming from the basement floor. They were coming from the stairs, moving up toward me. Fast. I didn't think. I slammed the door and turned the key just as something heavy slammed into the wood from the other side. The door rattled on its hinges. I backed away, my breath coming in jagged gasps. Then, silence. Total, terrifying silence. I crawled behind the counter and pulled up the security feed for the basement. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely click the mouse. The screen flickered to life in grainy black and white. There, in the center of the basement floor, stood a man. He wore a tattered yellow raincoat that looked slick with something darker than water. He wasn't moving. He was standing perfectly still, his head tilted at an impossible 90-degree angle, staring directly into the camera lens. And then he smiled. It wasn't a human smile. It was too wide, stretching from ear to ear, showing rows of teeth that looked like jagged glass. He stayed like that for 10 minutes, just staring, just smiling. When the sun finally began to peek over the horizon, my manager, Dave, pulled into the lot. I ran to his car before he could even get out. We grabbed the store's emergency shotgun and went back to that door. My heart was a drum in my ears as Dave turned the key. The basement was empty. There were no footprints, no wet patches, no man in a yellow coat. But when I looked at the security camera in the corner of the room, I saw something that made me quit on the spot. Someone had wiped a single greasy smudge across the lens. In the dust, they had drawn a tiny, perfect smiley face.
I never minded the quiet. That's why I took the graveyard shift at the logistics warehouse on the edge of the city. It's a massive 4-story labyrinth of steel shelving, echoing concrete, and shadows that seem to have a weight of their own. My job is simple. Walk the perimeter, check the dock doors, and make sure the silence stays unbroken. But the silence in a warehouse at 3 a.m. isn't actually silent. It's full of settles and groans. The metal expands and contracts, sounding like distant whispers or footsteps on the floor above. You get used to it, or at least you tell yourself you have. The second floor is the worst. It's the executive wing, filled with glass-walled offices that look out over the loading bays. At night, those glass walls act like black mirrors. As you walk down the long, narrow corridor, you're flanked by dozens of reflections of yourself, marching in perfect, eerie synchronization. It happened on a Tuesday, the devil's hour. I was halfway down the corridor, my flashlight cutting a yellow path through the gloom. I glanced to my left, catching my reflection in the CEO's doorway. I stopped. My reflection stopped. Everything was normal, except for the shape of my shadow. In the reflection, my silhouette didn't look right. It looked wider. I tilted my head. The reflection tilted its head. But as the glass version of me moved, I saw it. A distinct second protrusion growing from my left shoulder. It looked like a smaller, malformed head buried under the fabric of my security jacket. I froze. I slowly reached up with my left hand to touch my shoulder. There was nothing there, just the thin padding of my uniform. I looked back at the glass. In the reflection, my hand was reaching up, but the second head was now visible. It wasn't a growth. It was a face. A pale, eyeless face was pressed against the back of my neck, its chin resting on my shoulder. It was draped in a thin gray shroud that blended into my jacket. My breath hitched. I didn't turn around. I knew if I turned my physical head, I wouldn't see it. It only existed in the glass. I began to walk, faster this time. I didn't look at the next office door, or the next. I kept my eyes locked on the exit sign at the end of the hall. Clack, clack, clack. My boots hit the concrete, but there was a faint, wet dragging sound following a microsecond behind every step. I couldn't help it. I looked. I passed a floor-to-ceiling mirror in the lobby. I didn't just see the face this time. I saw the whole thing. A spindly, long-limbed creature was crouched on my back, its arms wrapped tightly around my chest, its long, needle-like fingers tucked into my pockets. Its head was pressed so close to mine that our reflections looked like a two-headed monster. Then, the reflection did something I didn't do. It smiled. The creature on my back opened a mouth filled with rows of needle teeth and whispered something into my ear. I didn't hear a sound in the real world, but in my mind, a voice like grinding stones said, "Don't look away, Elias. I'm almost through." I sprinted. I didn't care about the protocol. I didn't care about the doors. I burst through the main entrance into the cool night air. I stood under the bright parking lot lights, gasping for air, shaking. I looked at the glass of my car window. My reflection was alone. I quit the next morning. I didn't even go back for my last check. I asked them to mail it. I stay away from long hallways now, and I never, ever look into a mirror when I'm alone in the dark. Because sometimes, when I'm brushing my teeth, I feel a faint, cold weight on my left shoulder, and I'm too afraid to look up.
That's the end of tonight's stories. If any of them stayed with you, you know which one. Let me know in the comments. And if you want more stories like this, subscribe. I'll see you soon.